Recorded.
All right, we'll bring the meeting to order. This open meeting of the Town of Auburn Select Board is being conducted both in person and remotely, consistent with Chapter 107 of the Acts of 2022, which suspends the requirement of the open meeting law to have all meetings in a publicly accessible physical location. Further, all members of public bodies are allowed to participate remotely as long as reasonable public access is afforded so that the public can follow along with the deliberations of the meeting. For the public to join the meeting remotely by telephone, you can dial 1-408-650-3123 using access code 235-235-861. Or the public can join via computer at www.global.gotomeeting.com/join/235-235-861. All supporting materials that have been provided to the members of this body are available on the town's website. The public is encouraged to follow along. All right, we have all members here in person. No need for a roll call, so we'll rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, there were no public comment sign up? Let me just check the sheet. No, okay. All right, seeing none, there's no hearings or presentations. Are there any communications? So we'll go to select board items. Agenda item 5A, common vic license for Diamond Chevrolet, Incorporated, 54 Faith Avenue, Auburn, Mass. So you guys have the items in your packet. Any questions of the board members? Or do we have anyone presenting, excuse me? You can have that seat right there if you want. This is really just a renewal.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. All right. So it's pretty standard. You don't have any presentation to give or anything?
Nope.
Okay. All right. Any questions of the board members? No?
No.
Okay. Town administration?
Nope.
All right. Seeing none, do we have a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve the license, provided that all applicable requirements of the state and town and any of its departments, boards, and commissions have been fulfilled. Said license is subject to all the conditions stated upon it. Failure to comply with any and all of the conditions shall invalidate the license and render it null and void.
Motion, do we have a second?
Second.
Motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed?
I'll abstain.
Okay, it is a vote. All set.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
That's it. Thank you very much.
Nice and easy.
Yep. Thank you very much. That was awesome.
Okay, and we have agenda item 5B, the seasonal open air license on town property for the Boy Scout Troop 101 yard sale at the library. And again, do we have anyone presenting on that matter? How are you?
Good evening.
Good evening. If you could just give your name and address for the record.
My name is Andy Roy, and it's 106 Tinker Hill Road in Auburn.
This is for the annual yard sale?
Yes.
Okay. Do we have any questions of the members? Okay. Town administration?
Mr. Chairman, I reviewed the comments of the DCG, and I have no issue with the application.
Excellent. And with that, do we have a motion?
I will make a motion to approve the license, provided that all the applicable requirements of the state and town and any of its departments, boards, and commissions have been fulfilled. Said license is subject to all the conditions stated upon it. Failure to comply with any and all of the conditions shall invalidate their license and render it null and void, with the conditions recommended by the DCG to be placed on the license.
Second. A second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. It is a vote, and
I would also like to make a motion to waive the fee for the open air license.
I'll second.
motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. It is a vote.
That is it. Thank you so much. I appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, toasted roasters. All right, on to agenda item 5C. We have the transient vendor license for the Toasted Roasters Incorporated. And again, do we have a presenter? Good evening.
How you doing?
Good, how are you?
Good, good.
And again, if you could just give your name and address for the record.
Name is Marco Petrie. Address is 81 H-Foot Road, Charlton, Mass.
In Charlton? All right. All right, and what is this license for?
So, I have a coffee trailer. I'm basically a rolling coffee shop. We're coffee roasters, started several years ago roasting coffee, and during COVID, we wanted to do like a standalone brick and mortar, but it was very difficult to get anybody to return calls on properties. Decided to build a big trailer. And ends up, it's better equipped than most coffee shops, so it's very big, and we do handcrafted coffees, iced lattes. We do a frozen latte. We have lemonade slush, boba slush, hot chocolates, hot tea, cold tea. And if you can imagine a drink, we'll make it for you,
Absolutely.
if it takes coffee. We roast all the coffee fresh for the events too, so
Nice.
it's always fresh, always handmade.
All right. Any questions from the board members? Mr. Carpenter?
Just two, what is your route and what are the hours you're gonna operate?
That I don't know, that's based on events. Okay, so we get contacted if we do corporate events, we do festivals, farmers markets, things like that. This is really our first full year, so we're basically trying to get into all the towns. Visibility is key for us, so getting into locations. We've been contacted by several places that do cars and coffee, and most people have to bring their coffee. We were doing cars and coffee in Spencer at an event there, a gentleman had started up, and now we got approached by, High Octane, I think they're called. They were asking if we possibly could do some events for them. So in order to do so, I can't promise anybody anything until, without the approvals and stuff, so.
I'm gonna abstain or recuse myself just for appearances, in case there's any conflict, so.
Okay. Did you have a follow-up question, Mr. Carpenter?
No, it's just, it's unusual to do it this way, so we'll just have to make sure that we condition the license appropriately.
Okay. All right. All right, any,
Can I just ask a question? Doing it what way? Is it something I'm doing, or is it
No.
your procedure?
Typically, people are going around town on a daily basis. You're setting this up more as a catering type of
Right, we're
enterprise, so
by
it's very
event.
different. So
Yeah.
it's a little different. Not saying that's bad. I'm just
Okay,
saying
I
it's-
just-
Customarily, we do set hours, we do set, routes,
Oh,
things like that. are
oh,
all
yeah,
part of
so I'm mobile, but it takes hours to set up and hours to tear down. So it's not like I could just show up someplace, start selling coffee, and then move to the next. It's just not possible, Lars. So we basically try to do large events because of the size of the trailer.
Interesting. Very good.
and any questions from town administration?
No.
No? All right, seeing that's, do we have a motion?
I will make a motion to approve the license, provided that all applicable requirements of the state and town and any of its departments, boards, and commissions have been fulfilled. Said license is subject to all of the conditions stated upon it. Failure to comply with any and all of the conditions shall invalidate the license and render it null and void, with the conditions recommended by the DCG to be placed on the license.
Okay, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
Make a second for discussion.
All right, motion and a second. Further discussion, Mr. Carpenter?
I would just ask that we define what it means by determined by event. So how is the town going to license this? We're giving him a transient license. Is he going to need additional licenses from? He's going to different events. They're having different hours. It's just, as I say, it's not something that we've done before. So I'm just trying to make sure that we're not having people out all hours of the night. Not that that's probably gonna happen, but
Right, so anytime I do an event, I'm supposed to notify the Board of Health where I'm going to be and what hours I will be operating. That's basically all that I know through the Board of Health so far. I still have to do the whole Board of Health
inspections and
approval and
stuff.
everything after this.
So Mrs. Ruffley, would you just amend your motion to include that for hours, he will contact Board of Health?
Sure. So I'm going to amend my motion to include that for hours of operation, he will contact the Board of Health.
Amended motion, do we have a second?
Second.
All right, motion and a second, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye, all those opposed? One abstention. It is a vote. So thank you, sir.
Thank you.
All right, moving on to agenda item 5D, we have vote on the 2023 secondhand junk annual license renewal. And do we have anyone presenting on that matter? Okay. We do have the items in our packets. Do we have any questions of the board members? Okay, seeing none. Town administration?
Mr. Chairman, the only item of concern that I was focused on was any issues that may have been raised by the police department, but they have no problem with the application.
Okay, excellent. And do we have a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve the license renewals, provided that all applicable requirements of the state and town and any of its departments, boards, and commissions have been fulfilled. Said licenses are subject to the conditions stated upon them. Failure to comply with any and all of the conditions shall invalidate the licenses and render them null and void, and that the conditions recommended by the DCG be placed upon the licenses.
Motion, do we have a second?
Second.
Motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye, it is a vote. All right, 5E, we have the vote on Board of Registrars appointments. And again, you have in the packets the letter from our town clerk.
Mr. Chairman, I would make a motion that we appoint Emma Lee Martin to the vacancy.
I'll second.
Motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
And one opposed. It is a vote. Sorry, I thought we were gonna have a little more discussion on that. That caught me off guard.
Sorry.
Well, we can have discussion if you'd like, Mr. Chairman.
No, that's fine. I honestly have no objections against Ms. Martin. I had preferred Ms. Weigel myself, but again, I had no opposition to any of those candidates. All right, and moving on to gift acceptances, we have a donation of goods. That is a 1999 Toyota Camry, approximate value of $1372.
Motion to accept with gratitude and that a letter be prepared for the chair's signature.
Okay,
I'll second.
motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye, it is a vote. Okay, no proclamations or recognitions. So moving on to the development agreement on Perry Place with a possible potential vote. So, Mr. Carpenter, did you have time to review the agreement further? Do you have any questions, comments, concerns?
No?
Okay,
So, Mr. Chairman, we did provide the comments of Mr. Carpenter. We had a lengthy discussion relative to his concerns. And given that, we wanted to present it to the entire board to find out if they would like us to pursue additional conversations with the developer. But it would require a vote of the board to do so. Also, Mr. Gregory Woods is here from the Auburn Water District. He kindly attended tonight to answer any questions relative to the water line issue that was raised by the board over the last several meetings. And so if any further questions are required to be answered relative to that, he's here to give us some assistance.
would Mr. Wood be able to give us a summary of that?
Sure.
Good evening.
Craig Woods, Auburn Water District. Your question again?
Just with that water connection, is it the department's, is that a need of the department that's going forward?
Yes.
It's been presented to us a few different ways. We've heard differing opinions, so I'm glad you're here to really answer that.
The Water District has been investigating redundancy and resiliency for our system for over 8 years. We've had 8 grants with the DEP to study additional sources, alternate sources And the progression of that has been over the years that ultimately an interconnection with the city of Worcester is our best option. So we have been moving forward with that, with permitting with the state, agreements with Worcester City. So ultimately, we are going to be having this interconnection for redundancy purpose. This project costs roughly $2.2 million based on estimates from over a year ago. The reserve project, 40B in Western Auburn came up, which kind of pushed the project forward. Eastland had offered to assist us. They're still going to pay all their appropriate connection fees, but they offered to do a portion of that project. And then when the developer for Perry Place came in, they has offered as well to help expedite this process.
Okay. But this process would go through either way, either whether it be the developer or the ratepayer?
Correct. Ultimately, I mean, the district would have to pay for that, have to get the bonding and add that to our debt services. So that is one of the many capital improvements that we would be considering. We have a treatment plant to construct on South Street to eliminate the arsenic condition there. And then with the proposed EPA regulations that are coming down the pike for the PFAS compounds, that's another probably $10 to $15 million. So that's just one of the many pieces that we are thinking about when it comes to how to use the reserves that we have and not pass that on to the ratepayer.
Right. Yes.
So is that redundant connection required to provide them service for this proposed development?
No, we can meet maximum day demand, and that's what the regulations call for. You have to be able to meet maximum day demand with your largest source offline. We could meet both reserve, we could meet the reserve and Perry Place maximum day with all of our sources online. With one of our major sources offline, it gets close. But to your point, we could.
Through the chair, can I ask, so you said a portion of this is going to be funded through the Eastland project, and the other portion would possibly be funded through this Perry Place. Would it be going through regardless if the Perry Place funding did not come through?
Yes, ultimately it would. That's one of our considerations, whether we would spend the money to do that. But ultimately the goal is, again, this has been a long-term project for us to have that redundancy should we lose a source on our Church Street or on Walsh Avenue.
So the developer estimated that it was around $700,000 that they would be paying into it. So that would fall on the district, correct?
Otherwise,
To
we would be
cover it?
paying for that, correct?
Okay.
Correct.
And the district covers about 90% of Auburn?
That's correct.
Okay.
Any further?
I also like to comment, based upon the discussion I had with Greg last week, remember that $2.2 million is a year or two old. It could be double that right now. So there has been an escalation of cost that has not been factored.
The developer agreed to do that portion of the project, not a set amount of money. So that's actually gone up. We had proposals about $500,000 2 years ago to do that aspect. And now it's probably up into the 700s for what the developer's proposing to. Again, it's the project, it's not a dollar amount.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much.
I do have one question, Mr. Chairman,
Yep.
before Mr. Wood leaves.
Oh, sorry, Mr.
Oh,
Levy,
sorry.
for that question.
So currently, you have a written agreement with the developer, or is this something that is still in negotiation?
We do not have, we have a verbal confirmation at a meeting with the district, but we will be working up an agreement, a legal agreement.
Okay, thank you.
Well, I'm sorry, can I have a follow-up question? Would that written agreement be the LIP? Or would you have a separate written agreement?
I think it would be
I think it makes reference.
We would reference the,
Okay. Thank you.
Anyone else?
I'm good.
Well, don't run away too quickly. We might come up with 6 or 7 more, you know how that goes.
I do have another one. I apologize.
all right, so,
Do you need him to come back up?
Yeah, through the chair. I mean, so if it covers 90% and it goes to the ratepayer, do we know what that rate to each ratepayer looks like?
oh, that's a good question. So the question was, what would, let's assume we know the cost and there's not inflationary measures impacting it. What is the average ratepayer going to see as an?
I have not done that analysis on how much a $1 million or $2 million bond, how that would relate to our rates. I've not done that.
It's not a flat rate, it's a rate based upon usage.
I'm talking about repaying the bond itself, correct. And then the interconnection with Worcester, we would be paying the Worcester rate for the water. So that is another, we'd have to adjust our rates as well if we were to use that connection consistently. But the goal is to use that purely for emergency purposes. Correct.
I do have one more. So as we're talking about water supply and potentially losing a well, I know it takes quite some time to get a well approved, and it's quite costly. What is the district's plans, if any, to develop new water sources? Because you're making it clear that this redundancy is an emergency access. It's not intended to replace the Church Street. Is that correct?
Correct. So we have done a water source analysis. And again, I've been here for 2 years, so this has been a lot of history that precedes me. But we looked at, part of our grant was to look at the Silver Street wells. We had put some test wells in there, did a long duration pump test and water quality. And based on the results of those tests, we'd have to build a treatment plant there, a fairly large treatment plant, and as well as purchase the Zone 1, which is a 400-foot radius around it. So we have not secured all the land on that. So there is a cost associated with that. The interconnection with Worcester was one option, and then the other option was to put one large plant for the Church Street wells to treat all 3 of those wells and bring down the sodium and chloride and make that one large source. It doesn't necessarily eliminate any of the danger of contamination based on the pike, but that was one of the 3 parameters that they looked at from a source perspective.
I just have probably 2 more. So in that we're talking about an emergency redundancy, how long would this emergency supply last? Or what would the contract terms be for something like that? Because we're using this in an emergency. We're not intending this to replace water supply. We're just, hey, something really bad happened, we gotta shut down that well. We need this for, so we're terming it an emergency. So how long are we talking about would you have access to the emergency redundancy? And would there be an increase in cost to the ratepayer? Because Worcester Water, they may want to, just like if we were selling it to them, we might want to say, well, we need a little extra on top just because of you're using our water. And if we have an emergency now, we have less to address that.
We are in the process of working on our written agreement with the city of Worcester. And we would be a consecutive system, just like Holden and Paxton and the other communities around Worcester. We have approval from the state for a set amount of water per day, and Worcester has agreed to sell that to us. We haven't actually put together the mutual agreement between the 2 communities, but technically we are permitted from the state to have a finite amount of volume per day indefinitely. They did that analysis through the whole permitting process to determine that we are not going to impact Worcester's supply.
And do you anticipate that there might be an offset? There still may be cost to the ratepayers because we are sourcing it from a neighboring community.
Correct. That's something that we have not discussed or investigated yet, but obviously it would be, okay, we're going to be looking at a 6-month downtime. Then we would have to do the analysis on how that we would transfer that increased rate that we're buying the water from Worcester onto the ratepayers and come up with something that's equitable.
Thank you.
I think that's it.
Good.
Sorry, thank you.
Thank you, sir. All right, so did everyone get to review the changes that were recommended to the agreement?
Yes, so are we looking to go back, you're looking for a vote to go back to the developer with these?
Yeah, I think we have a few questions here as far as whether we want to bring these back to continue negotiations with the developer, what that timeline looks like.
Yep.
Do we want to set this off till, not next meeting, the meeting thereafter? but we don't want to lose time either, so.
Can I ask just a question for my clarification? For the amendment of section D, the annual contribution, where it lists the percentage, like occupied buildings, that's just when they apply for the occupancy permit, correct? It does not reflect a fully occupied building?
I think that point was really lost. Again, I thought we talked about in the last meeting, it was the issuance of an occupancy permit. And I'll be
Right.
the first to admit that was my intent, that was all parties' intent in the room. It definitely didn't read that way, so I understand where you guys were coming from with that. Ed, are you?
Well,
I believed it to be just a flat amount each year after one was issued, one occupancy.
Okay.
so is there a timeline associated with that?
I don't know what the phased-in approach is. I'm not so sure. They know whether it's gonna be over a 1 year, year and a half, 2 years on a phased approach. But I think once they get an occupancy for each building, that would trigger the $20,000 payment. So I think we would be looking for the maximum amount and not a prorated portion, because we'd be shortchanging ourselves. We want to make sure we get $20,000 a year for a 5-year period. And I think the occupancy, full occupancy, and I agree with the chair, if there's a vacant, a rental once they get the occupancy permit, that triggers the payment.
Correct.
Because there's always gonna be a vacant apartment or two.
And then even from that, so is it 3 months from occupancy permit issue? Is it 12 months from that? Like, so I still think there needs to be a timeline associated with that.
Oh, I assume that once the permit was issued, that was.
Right.
Well,
Where-
they're not cutting the check at that moment, are they? I mean, it'd be nice if they would, but I would
I
assume.
think a reasonable amount of time after the last occupancy permit is issued. Because I'm sure they're gonna do it in a phased approach.
After the last, but we don't even know what the actual project's gonna end up looking like.
3 buildings.
That's what they're requesting, but again, it goes before other.
Well, we
boards, right?
don't know what the final outcome is gonna be until it goes.
And that's why, like, I hate having it based on each one, but is there a way, like, you can, so if it's $100,000 over the 5 years, is there a way to prorate it per the building? Like, if you do one building, you pay. So, again, I don't know what the answer is.
Again, I think we'd be shortchanging ourselves. My intent, and again, Ed, let me know if you disagree, was once one occupancy permit issues, one building is ready, the occupancy permit is issued, that becomes due, then we could talk about a reasonable time thereafter. Maybe we call that 30 days, maybe we call that 60 days for payment. I think that would be fine to have in the contract, but as far as breaking a building by building, that was never the intent. That wasn't discussed either, so.
So it's your understanding that when they get their first occupancy permit, you're going to get a payment, or the town is going to get a payment. So I would just say that that needs to read that way.
Yeah.
And whatever a reasonable time, I know that that's legal terminology, but what's reasonable for one person, what's reasonable for another is very different, and I don't.
We could
want
say
this to be-
45 days after the occupancy permit is issued.
Yeah.
I like that number. It'd be even better if it was 20 days, but.
I also have a question on the sidewalks. I would like to defer to whatever the fire department wants. So if they want the extra 3 feet, 5 feet, whatever, I don't know how big a sidewalk is, as space for their ability to turn around, I think I would prefer that than requiring a sidewalk.
Understood, but there is a 40-foot right-of-way. And the reality is, we're going to be putting, as a community, if this is approved by the ZBA, well over 1,000 cars on a road that doesn't work. We have to think about all pedestrian, all types of traffic. And in fact, we even have a policy called Complete Streets that was put into place in 2018, which talks about these things. So maybe we can't get a bike lane, but maybe we can get a sidewalk. And my understanding is it's 5 feet, it's on one side. The residents should be able to walk on their street without having to be concerned about somebody taking them out. And again, we're going from what is a country road to a very busy secondary road now. And you don't know how many other people might be coming in from the adjacent roads. You know,
And these sidewalks, I guess I understand that point. When I first saw that, I had concerns about, well, we're just putting a sidewalk out to Auburn Street off to a 290 on-ramp. You know, I think we're to a place where we all had concerns about this project, which didn't seem safe. But you're really talking about just for walking in amongst that neighborhood itself.
Exactly. I mean, we can't prevent them from crossing Auburn Street, and we certainly have students who cross that street.
Every day.
We have people running on that street every day. So we can't say it's okay for the students, and it's not okay for the residents who abut the road to cross the street. I personally don't know that I would try to do it, but I can certainly understand at certain times of the day, they may want to walk. And again, it's adjacent to the village district. We're trying to get people out of their cars and into these areas. So, I mean, the residents who live there now may think this is a crazy idea. I don't know. I'm just trying to think going forward. We don't know what the residents of the future are going to want. But just for their general safety, traversing their street, they shouldn't be in the roadway. There should be a sidewalk.
That's fine.
Local preference by way of lottery.
Yeah, that was something that we did negotiate with Eastland, and I think that, you know, we want Auburn residents to have a preference. You know, that to me just makes sense.
Penrose projects had priority as well, priority for Auburn
Yes.
residents as well. Okay.
My recollection is there are some limitations on it, but, you know, any advantage we can give to people who already live here,
Yep, and we do have a precedence for that already.
you know.
Okay. And in regard to the betterments and ongoing road maintenance, that's just in regard to Perry Place, correct?
I would say if they're improving the road, they own the road. It's a private road. These residents didn't ask for anybody to widen their road. They're happy with their road.
But specifically, that wouldn't carry on to Perry Street,
That's up to the board. That would be my preference.
that it do.
That would be my preference, because they're going to be making improvements there. So again, I don't think the residents have asked for this development. They shouldn't be expected to support something they haven't asked for.
Mr. Chairman, I think any improvements to Perry Street are gonna be done in accordance with the feedback from our DPW director, and that would be, any public way would be our responsibility to maintain.
That's,
But the initial cost would be worked out with the DPW director.
okay.
Well, then, if we're going to do it that way, then I would suggest that we ask them for some money to be set aside to maintain it. I know they think roads last for 30 years. I've yet to be on a road that lasts 30 years.
Be set aside. Dedicated for future road maintenance on Perry Street and Pearl?
Absolutely, in that general area. Again, we're mitigating the residents or the expense to the taxpayer.
Does the existing pavement go all the way to Perry Street and stop at Perry Place?
I've driven it. I think it goes all the way to the end, which is Mr. Largess's property.
Pavement doesn't go that far? No, I think it's just before the condo, and that's why I'm not
okay.
sure where Perry Place meets Perry Street.
Just after Pearl Street, you know what, I don't want to, Ms. Paquin, do you want to? I'll bring the expert up.
Yeah.
Thank you. Good evening.
Good evening. So Perry Street ends right at Pearl, and then it continues on past Pearl as Perry Place. And portions of Perry Place are paved, but there's a large amount of asphalt that's gone, and
And the paved portion of Perry Street, they would be paving onto Perry Street, is that correct?
yes, it's
A little bit?
about 200 feet. There's a small portion that, that's, I don't know if it's just water damage or, it's visibly in worse shape than the rest of the road.
Okay. And their paving portion stops short of any driveways so as
Correct.
to avoid any kind of regrading and whatnot.
Absolutely.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Reference agreements, walking trails. Okay. I don't think the walking trail maintenance would be an issue, given their statement that they'll be owning the property and maintaining it. So I don't foresee any issues there.
I would say that you do want that.
We do. Oh, yeah. No, not an objection, just saying I don't think there'd be any pushback there.
And we also have to keep in mind, they may not own it, you know, forever. They may decide, once they build it, there's more profit in selling it to somebody, you know.
Yep. All we can speak to is their intent today as they relate it
Exactly,
to us.
so, and protect us in the future.
Yep. Okay. All right, so what do you guys want to do with this? And is there any further items you want to have added to this list?
No, just the general, you know, any improvements on these roadways, you know, they have to meet stormwater requirements. I would think that that's already in there, but just to reiterate it, that we want to make sure, my understanding is they don't have a lot of drainage over there. So if they're going to make improvements to the road, it would make sense that they take responsibility as they would for stormwater issues.
Yeah, I think that's really baked into the process. My understanding is that, you know, stormwater calculations, drainage for sewerage does not skate around the 40B, the comprehensive 40B permit.
I would just like it in there, just as extra insurance.
Okay.
If
Just give me
There's
this,
no objection.
I'm not gonna hold you word for word, just state again though.
I would just make it so that it is whatever the verbiage we need from the town, that it is, that any improvements meet stormwater, and any improvements that are needed to the stormwater is borne by the developer.
Mr. Chairman, can I ask one question of a DPW director?
Yeah.
Joanna, with the request that's before the board tonight, relative to the sidewalks on Perry Street and Pearl Street, that also has to be any stormwater regulations too. Does that require any installation of any catch basins along the road?
So I'm not really sure what the intent would be. Is it the intent that the sidewalk is installed along Perry Place, Perry Street and Pearl, or?
That's what it's
Yes.
appearing to be right now.
Yes.
Okay, so the installation of sidewalks makes it much more complicated with respect to stormwater, because now you're trapping that water within the gutter line. So you would have to install catch basins and infrastructure to capture that and you know, discharge it somewhere else. I'm not really, typically when you have a redevelopment project, right now, you're kind of looking at Perry Street, Pearl, and Perry Place as more of a redevelopment project, not a development project. So stormwater standards usually state that if it's a redevelopment project, then you're meeting the stormwater standards to the best extent practicable. So they're not really, they don't really need to adhere to the strict stormwater standards. So I guess I would ask the board to, if you're gonna be putting in stormwater, to clarify, or to state specifically whether it's, you know, just stormwater standards with, you know, and take into account the redevelopment aspect of it, or if you're looking at trying to capture that stormwater and also limit the amount of water that's being discharged. So you're looking at the pre and post flows from both, you know, from all the streets, which would be much more difficult to do just because now you're looking at capturing that water and storing it somewhere and trying to control that discharge.
A lot more construction as well in terms of drainage.
A lot more construction, a lot more, I mean, for the existing roads, I mean, you don't really have a lot of storage room unless you're going underground, and you don't really want to be putting underground infrastructure, storage underneath the roadways. So I guess my suggestion would be to abide by the stormwater standards, but looking at those streets as redevelopment and not new development.
So the standards change whether it be redevelopment or development.
Right.
Follow-up question. Joanna, is that going to translate into cost that may be required for the installation, the reconstruction of the road, the repaving of the road in some cases?
Oh, absolutely. Because, I mean, now if you have sidewalks, then, I can't give you exact numbers, but typically, in the past, we would say that paving a road would be, let's say, $40 per foot, but if you have sidewalks, now you're up to like 60. The prices now have escalated, but I just wanted to kind of show an order of magnitude. So the cost for reconstructing the road is going to be escalated in addition to the stormwater infrastructure. Now you have more pipes to clean. It's always, the roads that we have, country drainage, where it's going off to the side, you have the water, it's not being trapped inside within the roadway. It's getting discharged into pervious surfaces. It gets, it percolates back into the ground. You have groundwater recharge. It's a lot easier to handle, and it's treated by the microorganisms and the soils and everything else. Once you have a more structured stormwater infrastructure, now you have the pipes, the catch basins, everything else, and all those pollutants are gonna need to be treated.
Okay. All right, so Mr. Carpenter, would you agree with that? That it needs to meet the stormwater requirements as a redevelopment project insofar as Perry Street and Pearl Street are concerned?
She's the one with the engineering. So I'm happy to take
Can I
advice from
Ask,
her.
are those streets up for redevelopment soon anyways?
Perry Street, I think it's in pretty good shape. It's not really on my radar. I would have to revisit Pearl. But I would assume that they were all constructed within the same time period.
But we do have to keep in mind that construction vehicles are gonna be going over these roads.
Yeah.
And you're gonna have a lot more heavy traffic. So what's wonderful now is, that's why I'm saying, let's ask them to do from front to back, because when it's done, you don't want it looking like something that none of us want to drive on. No, the redevelopment standard for Perry Place, Perry Street and Pearl Street is fine if that makes it easier and obviously less of a trauma to the abutting neighbors. Obviously I want to be cognizant of that.
Okay. All right, and lastly, for the waterline verbiage,
Yeah, my general question was, how did that end up in our agreement? And maybe it was based on Blaker Street. I don't object to it being in there. I just, again, we have two different organizations. We're responsible for the town side. They're responsible for the water side. So I just don't want to see items that taxpayers might have to pay for not get included.
Yep.
If
I think your question earlier to Mr. Wood, kind of, you highlighted that fact too. So it is tough to reconcile where it's going to be possibly in an agreement with the water department. But honestly, it was an open meeting that the developer had offered it, and that's where it came from. myself, and I know we've had some disagreement on the matter, but I saw it as a benefit to lower ratepayers' costs. So there's certainly a question of jurisdiction of it even being in the agreement. I recognize that point. But I myself at least felt it didn't hurt. I don't know if town administration feels the same.
So it's very clear that the agreement does recognize that as its own entity, and that the decisions would have to come from the Auburn Water District. I think evidence of that agreement should be presented to the town. So, you know, and I don't see where it ties the hands of the town in terms of any cost to its residents by having it in there. But if Mr. Woods feels as though they can execute an agreement and provide a copy of that agreement to us, we can make some reference to that once an agreement is made, it'll be a copy that would be provided to the town.
My concern is I don't want those dollars being considered mitigation on the town side. So I think it's wonderful, and I'm certainly willing to support the water district. It does have a indirect benefit from our responsibilities, but obviously we all need water. So we certainly want to help them in any way we can. I just want to be clear that I don't want them then saying, well, we went to the water district, we said we're going to do 700. Well, our budget is whatever their budget is, which I'm sure they're not going to just show it to us. That was my concern from that area, that we're not crowding out other items. And again, my concern is principally the neighborhood, which is, you know, going to go through a tremendous transformation if this passes through the ZBA and the state processes, so. And I'm also acknowledging that the ZBA may think that all of this is hooey, but so now we need to have a dollar amount so that we can do something else. But, you know, I just want to be as clear as possible in the agreement so that we all know, because we don't want to get into a litigation situation down the road. And that's been my other concern. So that's why I brought these matters up, to strengthen it, not necessarily to quarrel with what was in it.
If I may ask Mr. Woods a question. The agreement, as it relates to item number 2 in our agreement, it does provide water service to 29, 32, and 39. Does that master agreement make reference to providing water services to those residents in our community, or is it a separate agreement?
No, it'll be a separate standalone agreement just for the work to do the interconnection.
Okay, I just didn't know if the two were tied, and maybe that's why it was in there.
No.
I actually have one more question, Mr. Wood, so I apologize. Are there any betterments? Does the water district assess any betterments when a water line goes in, and how are those treated?
No, we do not do
Okay,
betterments.
so that was my other concern, that again, the residents might be asked to pay something for something they don't need or don't want at this time. So, thank you.
All right, so I guess it's probably time for a motion. Do you guys want to instruct further negotiations in the matter in line with these notes here?
Yeah, I guess I'll make a motion to go back to the developer with these recommendations or negotiations, negotiating points, does that
Negotiating
work?
points, yeah.
I'll second that.
All right, motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
It is a vote. Okay. And you get all the notes?
I hope. Yeah, I think so, yeah. Well, we can watch the meeting again if,
Okay. And then fire department too. I think, Sarah, you wanted fire department too,
Yeah, I mean,
on the installation.
I defer to whatever would be best for that portion of the road. If sidewalks are best for the community, then sidewalks it is. If the fire department really wants that space, then I don't know that I'm the person to make that decision.
They have more than enough room, and they can only require 20 feet. So we
Okay.
have 40 feet, so there's no need to defer.
Okay,
Moving on to agenda item 8A, that's the asking the town manager to look into the establishment of an agricultural committee of 7 members to review current bylaws.
So, Mr.
Councilor
Chairman, the bylaw review committee did meet tonight, and I don't know the outcome of the discussions, and Adam is here to report the status of that.
Good evening.
Good evening. So, as the town manager just said, the bylaw review committee met just a little while ago, and they discussed the agricultural committee, and they have no problem whatsoever with this committee being formed. They didn't feel they had the specific expertise to really deep dive into some of these problems that DDS has been having. They did indicate they fully support and help out in any way they can. If new bylaws are being proposed or changes, they'd be happy to review them when the time comes.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
Welcome.
All right, so for discussion, the zoning bylaw review committee is passing the football over to us. So how do we feel about this agricultural committee to again take a second look at the that proposed zoning amendment for animals?
Chairman, I would make a motion that we request the town manager establish an agricultural committee. I'm not going to specify the members. I will leave that up to his discretion to review the current bylaw.
I'll second.
All right, motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
There's a vote. Okay, and do we have any edits, comments on the minutes of March 27th? Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
There's a vote. Good meeting, guys.